Hey guys, it's Kevin, my review for Mr. Robot Season 4, Episode 10 Gone, and I was very excited to see how this episode was going to play out, especially since last week. I mean, we basically got that face-off that we've been waiting for with F Society and, the remnants of F Society being just Elliot, Darlene, and Mr. Robot, and then, the Dark Army and things going in their favor. I really did not know what was going to happen from here on out because we still had 4 episodes left, and because of the fact we still have 4 episodes left, I think it was the right choice to make this episode feel a lot more calmer in that way. This was very much that. It was the calm before the storm, and I thoroughly enjoyed this episode. I know there were a lot of people that weren't as big of a fan because it was different from what they were expecting, but this was kind of what I was expecting them to do, considering that we still have 4 episodes left of the show. But we're just getting into it right now. So I think the big thing to talk about, with this episode is that this was not really an episode about Elliot. He was there, and we saw him having a little bit more of an interest to, go back to Washington Township and rediscover White Rose's project and things like that, because he's not done yet. He still feels like he needs the answers to that stuff. He wants to see, what that's really all about. He wants to know what she showed Angelo and all that stuff. But other than that, this episode was almost entirely devoted to the characters of Darlene and Dom. And again, I know a lot of people were disappointed by that, but considering that a lot of this season has focused on Dom and her having to be subservient to the Dark Army, I actually like the fact that this was essentially a wrap-up of her character. This was her finally getting that closure that I think we really wanted for Dom's character, because this is a character that has gone in very much uncharted territory at this point. I thought for sure that this season would end and Dom would be dead. I didn't think there was a possibility that, Dom was going to live, but that's exactly where we find ourselves in this episode. And I really love the story that was being told, because Dom's character, aside from the fact that she, was because she no longer can be anymore, an FBI agent and things like that, and she was very much, obsessed with the idea of, catching the Dark Army and trying to expose them and bring them to justice and things like that. Aside from that, her entire character has been someone that has never really done much for herself. She's always focused on others. She's just that nice of a person. But she also is someone who is very much alone, to the point where the only person she's connected with is some unknown guy in a chat room that, in a sex chat room that she probably doesn't even have feelings for, and this lonely Alexa thing. So I like that Darlene is the one that finally gets her to wake up and be like, look what you're doing to yourself. You're essentially just waiting to die at this point, because that is what she's doing. Even though Dom constantly is talking about how, like, oh, I need to be reunited with my family. I need to stay here. I have responsibilities here. Darlene is trying to tell her that that's not true. There are other opportunities out there for her. And I like that this episode was all about Dom finally, doing something for herself, and Darlene telling her that it is okay to be selfish. And I think that is actually a really good message for this character, and I really like what we ended up getting with her here. I think this is probably some of Grace Gummer's finest work in the entire series, because you really do see this woman that feels very lost. She doesn't feel like she has a path for herself. She feels like her only path is just this, and that's because that's been her entire life. She spent her entire life just wallowing in misery and doing nothing but police work, and she hasn't really known what to do outside of that. And here we have someone like Darlene, who she thought is nothing but someone that was there to manipulate her, now is really the person that is trying to turn her life around for the better. And I really liked where we ended up going with this here. I think it was a really great story for Dom, for sure. But the other part of this episode I really love is what this really means for Darlene, because Darlene pretty much says at the, when Elliot is talking about how he wants to go back to Washington Township, Darlene essentially tells him, I'm done. That was it for me. We got what we wanted out of the Dark Army. I don't really feel like I need to do this anymore. She wants to go out and discover herself. It kind of stems back to that conversation she had with the random Santa Claus dude in the in the beginning of this season, where he talked about how, she shouldn't be so focused on Elliot. She should want to do something for herself. And again, similar to Dom, she hasn't really gotten a chance to do that. And now she can finally relax and do something on her own. And what is that something? That something is the idea of maybe going with Dom and maybe going somewhere with her and maybe exploring this potential relationship, because these two clearly do have something, and you can tell that Darlene is willing to take a chance here, and I really did like getting to see that for her. And I have to say, this episode might have been some of Carly Chaikin's best work, or maybe her best work in the entire series. Not just the moment where she has that great monologue where she talks about how, they've won and that they Robin Hooded them and that everyone's, getting their money back. And it's a great moment that, you feel that victory. You feel like things have worked out for them and things like that. You feel like they have accomplished something. But really, it's the moment where she realizes where Dom wants to go. Dom wants to go to the place that her and, Cisco dreamed of. This is where they always said that they were going to go. And I like that it stems back to this because, again, in the context of the show, this was only a few months ago. This was back in the summer when Cisco was killed. And even though Darlene, she's been able to move on, she's not over it. I mean, she still has that love for Cisco. These two always planned to go to Budapest. This was where they were going to go when all of this was done. This was their essential plan. And so Dom entertaining this idea, this really gets to Darlene. She really struggles with the idea of wanting to make this full commitment because she feels like it would be betraying Cisco in that way. And again, it just really goes back to that idea of that love that Darlene has for Cisco, and maybe the idea that maybe she didn't really want to be with Dom. Maybe this was just her way of coping with Cisco's death. And when she's having that panic attack, I mean, I think it really underscores the idea that she's not over his death. It's still very much there. She hasn't gotten over it. And things like Angela, Angela's death and things like that, that's only made things worse for her, but she's been able to kind of distract herself because of the fact that she has been so focused on Elliot. But now that she isn't really doing that anymore, and now that she is focusing more on herself, she's reminded just how much she misses him and how much these two, what they could have accomplished together. And I nearly teared up when she was in that bathroom, and you wonder for a split second if she is going to go on that plane with Dom, but she decides not to. She decides she's going to stay on her own, and I heard a lot of people saying this was like a rom-com and things like that, and I think the show was very much doing that, but I also think it was trying to subvert your expectations. We expect for Darlene to run after her. We expect for Darlene to end up going on that same plane because we've seen a dozen romantic comedies before, but what this did was it turned it on its head. Darlene is not someone who is just going to make this choice because she doesn't want to betray Cisco like that. She would go anywhere else with Dom, but she's not just going to go off to, the place where these two always dreamed of going. That was her and Cisco's dream. She's not going to make that her and Dom's future. She wanted to go anywhere else with her, but this is where Dom wanted to go. This is where she felt she needed to go, and just seeing Darlene be in a place where, she's now realizing that that dream is pretty much gone. It's very tragic to watch for sure. And I think they did a really good job with really kind of closing things out there. I don't think this is the end of Darlene by any means. I know a lot of people are thinking it is, but remember guys, she's the key to opening up the third personality and things like that. That's still going to go down for sure. But I do think this is the end of her personal storyline. I think her personally, this is very much the end for her. But I think moving forward, she's going to be more of a plot device now. Not in a bad way, in a sense where she's going to be there moving forward to drive the story forward. She's going to be there to, get Elliot to recognize his third personality. I still think that is going to be a big part of this. But in terms of her story, I think this is very much the closure here, and I think it was very much the closure that she needed. Now, the other big part of this episode, though, especially when it comes to Dom's storyline, is the Dark Army. So as we know it, the Dark Army is pretty much done. Zhang's identity has been discovered to be White Rose. People now know that these two that these two are one and the same. Everyone's getting their money back. It very much seems like, they won. It very much seems like the Dark Army has lost in that way. But the most telling example that might not be the case is the scene that Dom has with Irving, because there are two ways to look at this. Now, I love the fact that we got to see Irving before this series ended. I was always hoping that maybe we get some kind of cameo. I didn't think it would happen, but I was always kind of clinging on to the idea that, maybe we'll get to see him again. Maybe that's going to happen. And I love that, after Irving, seeing that rage-filled, just terrifying version of him, he's now back to someone who is zen again. He's a lot more calmer. He's been able to finish his book, and he's very happy to greet Dom. And I love that he just passes off like what he did is, oh, that was just a lot of fun. Like him slicing up Santiago's body. It shows that even though, again, Irving is very calm, he's still very much a psychopath, and we still very much do see that here. And the scene, though, that, everyone's going to be going back to is where he talks to Dom, and he tells her that the Dark Army is no longer interested in her and Darlene anymore, that she can go off and nothing bad is going to happen, that they've moved on to bigger and better things. So I think there's two ways to look at this. One, he is being sincere. He means that she doesn't need to worry anymore, that she won in that way. She was able to beat the Dark Army, and that he isn't going to try to stop her because he's also moved on to bigger and better things with him completing his book and things like that. Or he is completely misleading her. He is tricking her into thinking that the Dark Army isn't interested, when in reality that plane is actually going to be, that plane is actually going to crash. And a lot of people are speculating that's what's going to happen. And again, I don't really know. I think it's unlikely that they're going in that direction, because, especially considering that, let's consider the fact I've actually seen the next episode already. I know, I cheated, but I couldn't help myself, okay? The way this episode ended and things like that, I was very intrigued to see how that would happen. So considering what we saw in that episode, I think it is highly unlikely that this plane is going to crash. But we also know that anyone that tries to cross the Dark Army, and that the Dark Army are sneaky little bastards in that way, it would not be, it would not be crazy to think that maybe that is something that they would do, that this is something that they've been planning for a while. Maybe they do plan to just kill Dom right then and there. A lot of people think, oh, maybe they wanted to kill Darlene. I think they would be much more focused on Dom, because to them, Darlene doesn't really mean all that much. Darlene's just someone that Dom was supposed to take out because of her affiliation to Elliot. Dom, on the other hand, is someone that was similar to Santiago, where she was subservient to them. She was supposed to carry out orders, and she, did the complete opposite. She just disobeyed them. She slaughtered so many of the Dark Army agents that maybe they are intent on killing her. Maybe their plan is to just, crash the plane. But again, I'm not going to come to that conclusion just yet. We still need to see how the show ends, and I don't think that that's the direction that they're going. So I'm kind of believing that maybe this is it for Dom. Maybe that scene of her on the plane where she's falling asleep and she's headed off to bigger and better things, maybe that is the last we're going to see of her. Maybe that is the ending, but there is still that small possibility that that is what's going to happen. But I just don't think in a show like this, I don't know if I could see them doing something like that, especially knowing we have 2 episodes left. Do you really think we're going to start off the series finale and Dom's going to be in some kind of plane crash and she'll be dead and Darlene's going to be, freaking out about it and all that stuff? I don't know if the show's going to do that. I think it could happen. It always could happen. There's always a possibility, but I think it's a very small possibility. It's a very unlikely possibility. So I guess we'll have to see the way things do play out there. But overall, like I said, I really like what we ended up getting here. I think this was a very necessary episode in that way. And also, I just think in general, considering that we've been so focused on the Dark Army stuff, I like that we got a smaller character episode here. We got to see Dom and her finding out that she can move on, finally getting a chance to focus on herself. And while she could go back to her family, as Darlene said, there really was nothing left for her, but also seeing Darlene and her also getting a chance to focus on herself. And I just really like what we got to see here. I think this was a very needed episode for sure in that way, and I overall really enjoyed what we got here. I also love that we finally, after, much talk about and a lot of anticipation, we finally got to see a substantial role for Leon here. He might have not had a ton to do, but I like that he was just the driver. He was there accompanying Darlene and Dom, but especially Dom's reaction to seeing Leon and him just being so casual about it, but her seeing him as someone that was with the Dark Army, I just thought was absolutely hysterical. I mean, Joey Badass never fails to amuse me in this show. I think he's such a fantastic addition, and I've just loved that they always find ways to keep him in the show. This is probably the last we've seen of Leon, though, similar to Dom. And if it is, I think this was a very good way for him to go out, because he told Elliot earlier in the season that if he needed him, he would be there. I thought for a split second that maybe he would end up helping them take down the Dark Army, but considering that he's a part of the Dark Army, I feel like this makes a lot more sense, that he is the person that helps get Dom on the path to, a better life. And I like that he was talking about, how nobody reads anymore and Kurt Vonnegut and things like that. That was just a lot of fun. That's exactly the kind of role that Leon needs. I really like what we got with him here. And again, it was just a lot of fun to watch. And I think they did some really, really good stuff there for sure. I think he was, as always, a really fun addition to this episode. So overall, not a lot to talk about here, technically. I mean, there's a lot to love, for sure. I think the best shot of the entire episode was either the ending where we cut from Dom going on the plane to Darlene crying in the bathroom, and also the unsettling tone of it all. I mean, even though, yes, this episode was a lot more lighthearted, you always had that sense that maybe something horribly wrong is going to happen here, because we've kind of been conditioned to feel that way with the show. Nothing is permanently good. No one is in a permanent state of solace, but it kind of seems like maybe that is going to be the case for Dom, or maybe not. I don't know. I mean, I think it will be, but there's always that possibility that the other shoe could drop. We don't know, but I think that they did a really good job with setting that up. But the other shot that definitely stuck out is when everyone's getting the money back on, getting back all of the thousands of dollars that they lost from the Dark Army, just feeling that sense of relief, feeling that sense, really getting a chance to soak in all of that, just victory and all of that feeling of accomplishment. I mean, it's just such a great moment. You can tell this is something that Darlene has wanted to happen for a very long time now, and I just love seeing the satisfaction there. That was such a great moment, and it really was because of how well it was filmed. I mean, you really felt like this was something that affected the entire world, and something that the entire world is feeling that same victory over. And again, it was something that was pretty insignificant. They didn't even know that the Dark Army was a thing, but now knowing how much money they lost, that they are the reason why the depression happened when it did, and things like that, they're now finally getting all of that money back. They now can finally relax in that way, and it's such a fantastic moment. I love the way that was done. The score here was also fantastic. I love that they used the Carly Rae Jepsen song towards the end of this, because even though, yes, it was a bubblegum pop song, again, it was their way of turning a classic romantic comedy formula on its head, and I think they did an excellent job with that here. The editing was also really great. I love that the only scene we got with Elliot was one's in Darlene's perspective. Other than the scene of him, researching White Rose's machine, which we now know is like a very large they basically flux capacitor in that way. Like that's basically what it is. And I'm interested in getting. Obviously, again, I've seen the next episode, so I know a lot of what goes down there. But I think this episode does a really good job of building up that anticipation, really just making us wait. You want to see that confrontation go down immediately. And I like the fact this episode told you, well, that's great and all, but we have other things we need to wrap up, so you got to wait for that. And I like this episode did a really good job with that. Again, I can understand if people were really disappointed by this episode, considering that it wasn't focused on Elliot, and it was a pretty, albeit pretty simplistic episode. But at the end of the day, like I said, I think this was needed. We needed to see closure for Dom. We needed to see closure for Darlene. And what better time to get that than before all the shit is about to go down? I think they did a really good job with that here. This was definitely the calm before the storm that we very much did need. But I think between the exploration we got of Dom basically just, again, wallowing in misery and her having to leave the Alexa and things like that and part ways and finally go off somewhere, and then the whole moment with Darlene breaking down in the airport bathroom with her reminiscing about what could have been between her and Cisco, it definitely did make this feel like a necessary entry overall. So overall, I am definitely going to, and between Carly Chaikin and Grace Gummer's amazing performances, overall, it did very much win me over. So I am going to give this episode of Mr. Robot, Season 4, Episode 10, Gone, overall, in A-. So remember, guys, when we had this episode of Mr. Robot, let me know what you guys saw this episode overall, left your thoughts on it. We'll see you guys in my next video, and we'll see you guys for that. Okay, bye.